welcome to PR Newswire's webinar on the 2021 Global State of the Media Report. So my name is Kenneth, Senior Marketing Executive at PR Newswire, and your moderator for today's panel discussion on the media landscape from the lens of journalists. So before we proceed further, here's some housekeeping matters. So today's webinar comprises of a discussion panel with journalists across APAC and a Q&A segment. So the webinar will be recorded and shared after today's session. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we would love to get feedback for today's event, so do complete the feedback form at the end of today's session. All right, so here's a quick introduction on the State of the Media report. So every year, our parent company Cision conducts the State of the Media survey that reaches out to its media database members. So these members comprises of media professionals such as journalists, bloggers, and influencers. So this year, Cision surveyed more than 2,800 media professionals across 19 markets around the world to gain deeper insights into how the media is working in the new normal. And you can download the report by scanning the QR code on the screens here. So the APAC edition of the Cision State of the Media report was released last month, and it covers key challenges that journalists face in 2020, pitching preferences of journalists, the use of multimedia and audience metrics, and stories that journalists are looking to do in 2021. So how can PR professionals better partner with journalists and continue to be a resource to them in the new normal? We'll be getting the take from our panelists on this question, as well as discuss key findings from the State of the Media report. And without further ado, let me introduce our panel for today. From Malaysia, we have Andrew Martin, Group Publisher of Asia Online Publishing Group. Andrew oversees the strategic and editorial direction of Southeast Asia's premier IT publisher and runs B2B IT news portals such as Data and Storage ASEAN, Cybersecurity ASEAN, and Disruptive Tech ASEAN. And from Hong Kong, we have Melissa Hekolia. Melissa is the anchor and supervising producer at a leading broadcaster. Melissa has over 20 years of broadcast journalism experience, having worked in the Philippines, Hong Kong, and London. And she has covered politics, technology, and business. She's currently the anchor of the evening news program and hosts and produces 2 current affairs shows daily. And lastly, from Singapore, we have Kelly Ng, correspondent at the Business Times. Kelly covers banks, sustainability, and digital assets. And previously, she was a reporter at Today, where she reported on law, Singapore politics, and health. So a warm welcome to our panel, and thank you for joining us today. All right, so for today, we will be discussing 5 key takeaways from the Cision State of the Media report. They include the biggest challenges that journalists face in the past year, and how they prefer to receive pitches and pitching with relevance, the type of content that journalists want to receive that can add value to their stories, and lastly, fourthly, using audience metrics and data in planning their stories, and finally, a 2021 outlook on the stories that they are looking to do. So 2020 has been quite an eventful year for all of us, and especially for journalists. COVID-19 has added challenges and also accelerated the digital disruption in the industry. So for our first takeaway, here are the biggest challenges that journalists face in 2020. The top 3 include fatigue over covering COVID-19 pandemic and its related news, reaching out to newsmakers and sources when so many people are working remotely, and public pressure to cover polarizing issues equally. So to our panel, as a journalist, what has been the biggest challenge for you in the past year, and how has it impacted your work? So we would like to hear from Melissa and Andrew, and also followed by Kelly. So to our panel, what has been the biggest challenge over the past year for you?
I think the fatigue over covering the pandemic and finding new angles to these stories. So you don't want to have all completely negative stories. You want to have a balance, and you want to be able to find really new angles on ways to cover the pandemic, whether it's a business story or a political story or a human interest story. As far as reaching sources, it's actually not too bad.
Hmm.
We can still do Zoom interviews. That's fine, although face to face is always better. Um, there are some constraints when filming, of course, but um, but yeah, I think that's okay. Yeah.
I see. And over to you, Andrew. Yeah, what has been the biggest challenge that your editorial team has faced over the past year?
Yeah, for us, it would be the fatigue over COVID-19, but with a particular nuance because we're covering technology, and so many of the stories we cover really do relate to how technology is affected by or affecting how you navigate COVID-19 and lockdowns. We get a lot of stories that are coming in that have a COVID-19 element to them. Now, the issue is not only us, but the readers do get a little bored with that repeatedly coming in. But we've got to balance that with the fact that it's still relevant. As an example, if you take the cybersecurity space, it is a fact that the number of breaches that are happening related to COVID-19 are still going up 2 years later. So we still have to cover it. So that's it. So we have to find ways to stop the fatigue and the staleness while still covering the fact that in a technology point of view, it's still a very topical thing to be talking about.
I see, great. And for Kelly, from a business perspective, covering business news and the world of banks, yeah, what has been the biggest struggle over the past year?
So I think I resonate with both the top two challenges from the survey. Fatigue over covering the pandemic. I think it comes twofold the way I see it. So one of it is readers' fatigue, which I think Andrew also alluded to, that we want to be mindful that our readers don't necessarily want to read another COVID story or another like digitalization, remote working story. And also from a journalistic perspective, we kind of want to ensure that pandemic news doesn't overshadow other important things that are happening. So I think that's something that's quite important to keep top of mind. In terms of reaching sources, I think the difficulty is not so much in reaching them. I think everyone's very reachable now because there's really not much else they can be doing. But then in terms of building a rapport with them, I think I would always prefer to meet them face to face. There are a lot of nuances that you don't get when you do a Zoom interview versus having a coffee chat with your source. So
Okay,
yeah, I think that is one of the challenges.
great. And to Melissa and Andrew, for the second challenge, how are you sort of maintaining the relationship with newsmakers when people are working remotely?
I so a lot of my sources I already have a relationship with. So it's not a problem. For news sources, of course, it's a challenge. And, is exactly as what was mentioned, it does make a difference when you can meet face to face to really establish some rapport. Uh, but I think I'm adjusting still. I'm open to speaking to people on the phone or through Zoom, just to listen to them and hear their pitch and see if there's any relevance to it in what I'm doing. Yeah.
Okay. And for Andrew, yeah, how is the relationship building going on when it comes to building editorial context despite the remote working situation? for your team?
So in one respect, in terms of being able to contact sources and reach sources, it's not an issue. But I think I would agree with what both Melissa and Kelly said, that it's kind of the quality angle that suffers. I think we've spoken about this in some of our planning sessions before, and what I mentioned was that when you do a Zoom meeting, particularly for people that work in the tech space, maybe it's the same outside the tech space as well, but the priority and importance they give to that meeting can be compromised compared to when they meet you face to face. As an example, they may drop out quicker because something happens in the background in their office, or they're not paying full attention because they're actually typing on their screen at the same time that they're on the Zoom. So it's the reaching has not been a problem at all, not been compromised in any way, but the potential quality and the outcomes we get from using things like video conferencing are compromised somewhat.
I see, great. So thanks so much for sharing the challenges and changes that we face here in the media industry. So despite these waves of changes and challenges, one thing that should remain constant is the importance of a relevant pitch. So this leads us to our second takeaway, that both journalists are both overwhelmed and underwhelmed by pitches. More than 1 in 4 journalists receive over 100 pitches per week, and they only found out that up to a quarter of pitches are relevant. So to our panel, do you resonate with this finding, and what recommendations can you give to PR professionals to make their pitches more relevant and to get your attention? So to Melissa, yes, what's your take on this for this?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. First, keep your pitches simple. It's the KISS rule. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Bullet pointed. And whatever you're pitching, I understand you're pitching this for your company and they have certain messages you want to send out. But how is that relevant to a wider audience? So make sure that you make it relevant to a wider audience. Make it interesting, make it stand out. Yeah, that's really what I look for. It has to be relevant to like the average person, or super, super interesting, you know, that people are like, wow, what's that about? But if you're just pitching your product because there's something new or you launched whatever, forget it. You know,
I see.
Yeah.
Great.
Relevant.
And Melissa also has kind of a treat for us today. So she has kindly picked up some examples of good and bad pitches that she has received. So we would like to bring that up to the screens. And Melissa, if you could talk us through,
Sure.
you know, I think an example paints 1,000 words, and that makes it clearer.
Yeah. So this
off with the example of a good pitch.
Yeah, so this one was quite long, but it grabbed my attention because it was funny. It was about sex toys. Okay. And I was like, huh. But then this person provided data. And I just thought, oh my God, this is great, because, you know, he's showing the relevance of this and how use of these products has actually risen during COVID. This is a story you could actually do, because obviously, you know, people are isolated, they can't be in relationships, it's hard to meet people. And I guess the next best thing is technology. So this could really be a fun and funny story to do. And with the data provided, it just added to it. I wouldn't normally read something this long, but because I found it amusing, I did. And if I could have done this story for our show, I would have, but you know, there's no way we could do it. But it was really a creative pitch with all the data.
So one of a crucial way to add relevance to pitches is actually bring in data, is it?
Yes, data is really important. Otherwise, I have to do all this research on it. I just spent like a day and a half doing research so I could put one line in my story. Well, no, maybe not that long, but yeah, I just did all this research looking for like the exact data I wanted.
I see. Great. And on the flip side, so let's move on to what not to do. So shall we move on to the next pitch? So Melissa, please talk us through on this pitch then.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I never expressed interest in this company. This is irritating. Okay, I've never heard of this company. I didn't express interest in them. So that's the first cross. And then they're talking about future mobility. And I'm like, yeah, just keep it simple. What are you talking about? Wheelchairs? Okay. Just tell me what it is. Future mobility is so vague. It just be direct. And so then I didn't even open the PDF attached to it the first time it was sent. Then I got this sent to me so many times. I finally opened the PDF. When you read the PDF, if you can scroll, can I control this? Oh, I can control it. So here's the attachment, and it says who they are and what they do. And again, it's just like disruptive mobility technologies, future mobility. And then finally, here it is, high performance hypercar developer. What is this? Is this a car with ADHD? Come on. What makes this car different from all the other cars out there with all their new technologies that are basically, supercomputers on wheels? But this, spare me. I was so irritated. I got this pitch about 5 times, and they even reached out to a colleague to say, do you think we could talk to? And I was so frustrated because even after I did communicate back with them, I said, you really need to make this more simple. And they still didn't. So it's not happening.
Okay, so the key takeaway here is to use less fancy jargon. So what's the main thing here?
It's the keep it simple, stupid rule, the KISS rule. This is like the first rule of journalism. Keep it simple.
Great.
I won't say the stupid part, but that's what my professor said. It's KISS, right? So yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for sharing. And to Andrew, for yourself, what recommendations can you give to PRs to make their pitches more relevant and something that would get to your attention?
Yeah. So first of all, I think I'll say what she said. So that would be the first thing. There are a lot of there's probably a lot of things I could go through. It's one of my bugbears, but if I'm going to pick one, it will be one that's specific to us and our publications. So the name of our publications kind of tell you what we do. Cyber Security ASEAN, Data and Storage ASEAN, Disruptive Tech ASEAN. So those are quite big clues as to what we're interested in covering. So it is amazing, however, how many pitches and even just press releases we get that have absolutely nothing to do with those titles. As I said, it's not a big mystery. We do what it says on the tin. So we like to be overwhelmed because we cover a lot of stories every day, but we want to be overwhelmed with relevance. And where we see particular PR people that continually send irrelevant to us content, I can tell you that our editorial team just skip over that name. They know the names. They just ignore them because it's a waste of their time. So that would be the one. As I said, there are many more, but I'll pick that as our main one.
Great. So it's kind of giving consistently relevant pitches so that they can build a reputation of them giving you relevant news instead of skipping through their emails the next time with your teams.
Yeah, in our case, just take a few minutes to check the publication, see what it covers, and then make a decision whether your pitch is relevant or not.
Great. All right. And on to Kelly. In covering the business news, what type of pitches would tick all the boxes to get your attention, and what's relevant to you?
Actually, can I kind of answer the question the other way? So I think this point it might be debatable, but I think one kind of pitch that sort of turns me off, I guess, is when the pitcher sort of oversells. And I think we see that a lot. I think every product or service or company thinks that their news is like the biggest news, but in the broader perspective, that may not be the case. So I think I tend to get quite tired of reading pitches that say this is the first, and it's always using that we are the first, we are the newest, in that sort of angle, and I will tend to like gloss over them immediately because it's like, oh no, it's another one of these things. Yeah, so I think that's one. And I agree with Melissa on the use of data, especially at a publication that covers business and financial news. We are really focused on data, but it also has to be well backed up from a credible sample size. So for surveys and things like that, would pay a lot of attention also to the quality of your sample, not just the results of the data. Yeah, so I think those are the main points for me.
Main points. Okay, yeah. Great. Okay, so thank you, panel, for sharing. What makes you tick when it comes to looking through pitches. I think we found out that the all important tip on reading the media title, like Andrew shared, and also not overselling the product and services, and of course, Melissa also shared what not to do and what to do in pitches. All right, so a reminder here to submit your questions to our panelists in the Q&A box if you have them, and we'll get to them at the end of today's panel. So another thing that can make the job of journalists easier is also sending them content that can add value to their stories. So on to our next takeaway, for what's on the most useful types of content that journalists want to receive from brands and PR professionals. So we're happy to see that press releases come up tops, and that's followed by original research reports that include trends and market data, event invites, and initial stories for initial ideas for story development. So to our panel here, what's the most useful type of content that would help you in your story? So perhaps we could get our take from actually Kelly here. Kelly, I understand that you also double up as a multimedia journalist. So for yourself, what is the most useful type of content that would add value to your stories?
Yeah, I think this relates to my earlier response, right? Because of the subject matter that we cover, I think numbers and data tend to be very attractive to us if they are credible and have a reliable sample size. And yeah, I think at the Business Times, we're increasingly trying to step up on our multimedia content. So repurposing some of this content into infographics, explainer videos. So I think market data and numbers-backed sources of content are also very relevant for us. So we have a graphics team that can very quickly translate some of this reports into graphics, and I think that helps our readers to like not let them read a wall of text, but paste some of that out into visuals.
I see. Great. And for Andrew, what type of content and story opportunities from here would add value to the stories that you produce?
Yeah, so in terms of your results, obviously news announcements and press releases, they are our lifeblood, so they're absolutely critical to us, and we don't have any shortage of those, as mentioned before. If I'm going to pick two other things just quickly though, pre-COVID, particularly with what we do, which is we are trying to cover technology and decipher technology and give people insights into new things coming along. And we're going to a technology audience. So when pre-COVID, when we were invited to events, sometimes around the world, that was really valuable to us because our journalists got so much face time with so many well-informed people, and they could effectively bring all of that knowledge that they gained back to our readers. So that would be one. The other one, particularly for the people that are on this discussion today from the PR community, is proactively coming to us with offers of comment on the news that we do. If we have, and there are a few, but we can probably name them on one hand, PR professionals that spot our stories and then approach us and say, hey, we've got an expert that has got something they could add to your story. Given that we're online and we can update stories many times, that's huge value, and that would separate many PR people that we speak to from the pack.
I see. What kind of, maybe could you elaborate more on what kind of expert comments are you looking out for?
Yeah, I'll give an example. Let's take cybersecurityasian.com. So let's say we decided to cover the Columbia pipeline ransomware story, right? And we'll always do a technical view on that. So because there's enough going on around the kind of sensationalized side of it, what we're looking at is the actual technical things. What happened? What technology could have been used to prevent it? So if a PR person representing a technology company that has a solution that could have helped in that situation, offers some kind of comment, insight that would help our readers understand how they could protect themselves better, or what you would do in the event that you got hit with the same thing, or even some kind of insight into what actually happened. All of those things are hugely valuable.
I see. Great. So always include comments, availability to experts to provide comments to supplement stories and to your stories then. All right, and on to Melissa, because Melissa, you cover a broad range of topics in current affairs to finance. So for yourself, what type of content would best add value to the stories that you produce?
Right. Like Kelly, I agree. Actually, the original reports, market data, trends, I'm always looking at that because that provides relevance to the audience for both shows, you know. So I'm always searching for this stuff because having those reports and knowing what the trends are, having this data gives me ideas for stories, whether that story is based on that report or on something else. It's actually so useful. And then I also think that initial ideas for story development are also good because it leaves it open. Normally in our shows, we'll have a couple of case studies. And so just having that idea there can spark a story. And then you can find your case studies for that, for the development of it. It's really good. So those are the things that I really look for. Yeah.
I see. That's great. And aren't you on? If I could loop the conversion back to Kelly, because Kelly, you repurpose data from research reports for infographics and multimedia assets frequently, as in for your multimedia work. What type of for research reports from brands? How can they be better improved or better presented to make things easier when you repurpose them for your infographics or multimedia assets?
To be honest, I think I haven't come across like super bad examples so far. I think there are some general rules in terms of like visual presentation, making sure colors are easily distinguishing the different samples.
Okay.
And I think in general, just greater use of graphics, because I guess it's the same thing that we as journalists are learning, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, if you don't want to read like just chunks of text and have to synthesize you don't want your readers to have to synthesize a lot of that, especially if you envelope a lot of numbers in text. So I think for us as well, it is helpful if the reports come with graphs and like tables that we can, I guess, easily repurpose. But maybe to a certain extent, that's the job of the journalist anyway. And I think just a small point, but it's helpful if like the graphics are embedded within, the report. Sometimes some organizations put them like everything at the end, like as an appendix. But I think it's helpful that when you're reading about it, you can see it visually presented. Yeah, but that's probably a small point.
Okay, I see. Great. So thank you so much for sharing on the top types of content that you would love to see. And I think that you guys touch on how it's important to include access to experts, and also the importance of including being data rich in terms of research reports. Okay, and moving on to our fourth takeaway. In today's digital age, journalists are adopting new KPIs and measures of success for their stories. So in In this takeaway, 60% of respondents agree that looking at audience matrix has changed the way that they evaluate success for the types of stories. So how much of a part does data play when it comes to making editorial decisions, deciding on which stories to do or what to follow up on? So Andrew, for yourself, you manage multiple news IT portals. So what types of audience matrix do you monitor for different types of stories that are on your portals?
Yeah, so I have a feeling we may look at this differently from a lot of other media outlets. So, and it could be different from what Melissa and Kelly look at. So data is important, but vast readership numbers and reads or views or visitors to each story are actually not that important to us. Surprisingly, that's because one, our audience that we're after is very targeted. So we do want to speak to, chief security officers, or we want to speak to IT managers. And the articles that we have are, if it's around backup, we really only want to get to people that are very interested in backup at that time. So the metrics that are much more important to us are the engagement metrics. So do those people touch articles on the same topic multiple times? Do they go from a news story, a link in a news story, to a more in-depth gated download, as an example? Because we're always looking to acquire more audience, and we're looking to add more subscribers into our database because we're online. So we do use our stories to try and get engagement and subscriptions, so that we can then do more targeted promotion of our stories going forward. So I would say, if I'm going to put a general cap over the top, the thing that we look at most for all of our content is the engagement and the click-throughs.
I see, great. And when looking at engagements and click-throughs, how does looking at all this help to decide on which stories to do or which topics to focus on? If you could.
Yeah, so that's slightly different. So when we're looking at choosing a story, again, we will not be so worried around did it get a lot of click-throughs, or did it get a lot of engagements, or even a lot of views. When we decide on a story, it's absolutely about how relevant is that story to our title. So we're very clear about what we want to cover on each title, and as long as the story is relevant, then is very likely we're going to want to cover it. But we are looking for unique angles. We don't want the same theme coming back and back again. So as an example, I can tell you in the cybersecurity space right now with remote working, there's a lot of talk about something called zero trust. That's obviously relevant to us, but we've had a lot about it. So we would be looking for unique angles on that topic now rather than just generic.
Okay, great. And thanks for sharing, looking at audience matrix from an editor's angle. So we would like to get a perspective from a journalist angle. So to Kelly, as a correspondent working on business stories, what are some of the audience matrix do you monitor when it comes to writing your stories? And how does it help you decide on maybe which topics or which format of stories to pursue?
Yeah, I think as a newsroom, data is really growing in importance for us. And we've in the past year beefed up our audience strategy teams. So we receive like weekly and monthly reports on metrics like, number of page views, engagement data, like the time spent, number of pages viewed during each session, as well as how we match up with competitors. So as individual journalists, we are also encouraged to look at some of this data and experiment with it. So for instance, we have a headline testing approach in our newsroom where the individual journalist, even after the story has run online, can tweak the headlines and maybe experiment with different keywords to see which ones might catch more eyeballs. So I think there is a considerable emphasis from our bosses that we should take ownership of our own data and our own how our stories are doing. But having said that, I think while data is very important, we also, well, at least my editors try to encourage us that it's not the be all and end all. So there are certain topics that, you know, just tend to be sexier, like fundraising, you know, by startups versus inflation or GDP, topics that are like drier. But that doesn't mean, because we're all beat reporters, so to a certain extent, we cover topics within a certain confines. So it doesn't mean if, you know, my story is not like in the top 5 this week, it's not important or that I'm a bad journalist. So I appreciate that, you know, our editors still try to balance that use of data with, you know, some of the traditional things that we have to do as journalists. There are still stories that need to be covered that may not, you know, get as many page views. So yeah, that's, I guess, where we are and how our approach towards data right now.
All right. Okay. And over to Melissa. Yeah, for yourself and your programs that you produce, how does Audience Matrix help to evaluate the type of stories that you do? Melissa, you may be on mute.
We're really kind of targeting the English-speaking audience, and so that's how we choose our stories mostly.
I see. All right. So thanks for sharing with us on the various metrics from the importance of engagement and also the importance of also testing out readership numbers when it comes to deciding on stories. So for our final takeaway, we look at the top types of stories that journalists are looking to do in 2021. So giving a look ahead, so these are the top types of stories that reporters are focusing this year. They include looking for new angles for COVID-19 coverage, looking for feel-good stories on how companies and communities are helping others, and lastly, looking for stories on furthering diversity, inclusion, and equality. So to our panel, how does these findings sit with you? And also we wanted to find out, because COVID-19 has also dominated news cycle. So how has COVID-19 related stories and the impact on your industries, for these stories, how have they evolved over the past year? Yeah. So let's say, Melissa, I mean, you cover a wide range of stories. Yeah. So for COVID-19 coverage, from your perspective, how has the types of stories evolved 1 year after the pandemic has hit?
Definitely, we've been looking for new angles. I did one recently, and I'm doing a follow-up one now. So here in Hong Kong, the musicians have actually been the hardest hit. They've been the only group of people not able to go back to their jobs. I mean, they have to do other stuff. They have to do food delivery. They have to do dishwashing, whatever they can get. So it's been over a year for them. But just the other day, the restrictions were lifted. And so now it's time for a follow-up on this group. So tomorrow, I think they can go back to live gigs. So now it's really looking at it, you know, a year later, how have things changed? And of course, I mean, this story has been done so many times. What things are here to stay? What things might go back? You know, what's the new world we're living in? So there's another story I'm looking at. It started out as a property story, but it's kind of morphing into property and office space. So offices obviously are realizing you can work remotely. So they don't need all this real estate. So it looks like a lot of big companies are looking for shorter leases on their property and flexible space. So it's kind of a hybrid of these, what are those offices called? Just those, you know, those short-term offices where you can book for a month, right? So it's a hybrid of that, but having a bigger space for people. Small for these big multinationals, but yeah, you're not getting space for individuals. You're getting space for a group of your employees to come in however many times a week they might come in for. So yeah, it's looking at how COVID has changed life and society and even our culture. You know, I think we're getting more detached and used to technology,
I see.
which is good and bad.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And if I may divert the attention to Kelly, because one of the top stories here are looking for stories on furthering diversity, inclusion, and equality. So as somebody that covers sustainability as one of your beats, ESG has been a hot topic among companies here. Wanted to get your take on what do you consider when deciding on which ESG initiatives to cover for companies?
Yeah, I think ESG has definitely become so top of mind in the past year. Actually, a lot of it fueled by the pandemic and climate change, which I think, I mean, it's a good thing that it's becoming it. People are paying more attention to it, but we do receive a lot of ESG pitches as a result and have to be pretty discerning in what we decide to pick up. So I think as a journalist, I tend to be more interested in like issues based and like trends centered stories rather than a standalone product or service or like a company. So if it were that sort of a more specific pitch, sometimes I would just sort of KIV it for if something similar comes about and we can sort of group them together as a feature trend type story. And I guess one thing that we write a lot about and have to be very conscious about as journalists too is the risk of greenwashing and ESG washing, right? That everyone now tries to find an ESG angle to everything. So we need to also be sure that this is something that is credible and not just like a puff pitch or marketing strategy. So that's something that we tell our readers to be careful about. Then I think as we select our pitches, we also need to have that in mind.
I see. What are some of the top questions that go through your mind whenever you receive a ESG pitch or ESG release? What are some of those questions that you would look out for, or you look out for?
Right. I think as again metrics, whether a company or a financial institution is committing to certain targets, I think that would make their commitment hold more water, and also putting their initiative or their new offerings in the context of a broader, like a regional context. And I'm also increasingly more interested in trying to pay more attention or finding more stories in the S aspect of ESG, because I think the environmental aspect, rightly so, has received a lot of attention, like with green bonds and green loans, and this green taxonomies that even the Singapore authorities are trying to standardize all this. But I think like the social aspect of ESG has sort of fallen under the radar to a certain extent, maybe because it's harder to measure. But I think, if anything, the pandemic has also showed us that there are so many social gaps and issues and inequalities that exist and are perpetuated by COVID. So I think for us, even as a business paper paying attention to the economy, I think these are topics that we are interested in as well.
All right, Ken, thanks for sharing your insights on covering ESG news and on to covering technology news from a B2B perspective. So Andrew, when it comes to you, what types of stories is your team looking out for in 2021 when it comes to writing technology for the B2B crowd?
Yeah, so I think the question I think on your report was how have the events of 2020 shaped the editorial strategy for 2021? Obviously, COVID has and it does affect what we're looking at in 2021. So I would say if you look at your responses there, I'll take the first one, looking for the new angles for COVID-19 coverage, and then just under the box, looking for the stories on how companies and communities are getting back to normal, and stories on new technologies, how they're helping business and consumers. All of these play very largely into our strategy for this coming year, because From a technology point of view, again, I think our team is a little different from sometimes from what Kelly and Melissa's organizations are doing, because we're usually just following the trends of technology. We're not looking for a story. We're just looking to cover what is happening day to day with new announcements on technology and then bringing that to our readership. So we know that what's happening with COVID in over the next 6 to 12 months is going to be a little different, but will have profound effects on what happens with technology. So as people go back into the workspace, there are going to have to be technologies that help them navigate new ways of working when you come back together. So we're going to be looking at those things. And I would say that, again, from what we're looking for from our PR colleagues, is to really come up with interesting angles where maybe COVID-19 sits behind the main point you're making. We know that it's part of the story, but we really want to look at the issue that it's solving and come up with creative ideas to present that to us. And if part of that narrative is recovery from COVID-19, I think that needs to drop somewhere into the body of what you're giving us, not the headline.
I see. Great. Great. Thanks so much for sharing your insights on the types of stories that we are looking, that journalists are looking to do in 2021. All right, so that brings us to the end of our panel discussion for today, and we'll move on to the Q&A segment. We have received quite a number of questions, and we will try our best to get to as many of them as possible. All right, so the first question is, for our panelists, okay, so is there a difference between receiving a pitch from a company's corporate communications director versus receiving it from a PR agency? Does it make any difference to you when you receive pitches from a company's corp comms director versus from an agency?
No, none at all.
So it's the same thing.
It's all the quality of the pitch. That's it.
I see. So it doesn't matter who receives them, huh?
Yeah.
I see. What about for Kelly?
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree. It doesn't make a difference for me.
I see. Great. Okay.
I would agree.
Yep.
I was going to say I would agree with that 100%, and just maybe add to it that the content of the pitch. I agree with Melissa and Kelly. The content of the pitch is all important, but something I alluded to before, whether it's an agency or someone that is within the client, the corporate comms director, as you said, the team do get to know who are the people that come up with creative and informative pitches, and they look out for those names no matter where they may be employed.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So moving on to the next question that we have from our audience here. So it's about pitching. How and when to best follow up to journalists after sending the pitch? Yep. So, just as how it's important to send the pitch, I think follow up to PRs are also pretty important. So how would you prefer to be followed up after a PR has sent you a pitch?
I'll jump in first. Okay, so I think that to some extent you have to have a crystal ball, because it just like anything, it depends when you catch the person. Yeah, if they happen to be in the middle of writing or editing or whatever it is they're doing, they don't want to speak to you at that time. Right? And there's nothing you can do about that. I think it's just a really difficult part of the job. So we discuss this as a team, and beyond people being really harassing us, calling literally twice a day and things like that, we just try to accept that there is a job to do, and within reason, we accept that they have to chase and see where they're getting. The only other thing is when they are told an answer that they don't want, as in maybe we're not going to cover this, that they kind of accept it.
Okay. Melissa and Kelly, your thoughts?
I totally agree. I mean, and it's true. When I'm writing or in the middle of something, I don't want someone texting me and then emailing me follow up for something. I I am mindful though that, you know, it's their job. And so if it's somebody I already know and who has pitched me successfully in the past and has been helpful, then I will take the time out to reply at some point within the day, depending on how busy I am. But I'll try to do it within the day just out of courtesy. But otherwise, it is, you need a crystal ball.
I see. And Kelly, for yourself, what are your preference for follow-ups?
Yeah, well, I agree that there's no kind of like formula to it because I mean, our schedules are just so unpredictable. So there's never like a good time this week might not be the best time next week. So yeah, I guess usually the PRs that contact me will follow up like a few days after or like at the end of the week. And I think that has worked for us so far. And yeah, like they said, some of those that I already have a relationship with, they'll just drop a text. So that might be a lot faster. Yeah.
I see. All right. Okay, Ken. And moving on to our next question, how much of a difference does the subject line matters when it comes to a pitching email? Does it make a difference, the subject line, for the emails that you receive?
Yes, I think it can. If it's catchy, then sure, I'll open it. But if it's some like boring thing of like launch of blah 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 or first whatever, then I probably won't open it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Agree with that. I think, you know, we have one editorial mailbox for actually all of our publications, so everything goes in there. So there's a lot of mail, so the guys have to go through. So yeah, if a heading really spells it out and captures their imagination, it will stand out.
Okay, and Kelly, so does the subject matter line make or break for a pitch? What do you think?
I think it makes a difference. It may not make or break, but yeah, I think if it's catchy and brief, because sometimes I don't even like click to open the email. So, you know, within that like brief subhead, I should be able to sort of be interested in the pitch. So yeah, I think it can make a difference.
All right. Okay. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Actually, Kenneth, Kelly
yes,
makes a really good point there. The subheading is very, very important. You have your heading, and then if you know your email window pane, you get 2 or 3 lines after. You can almost guarantee you can get those read if they are well put together. So that's a very good point, Kelly.
So thank you for bringing our attention to the all-important subheading. All right. So moving on to the next question. How much does relationship building with in-house PR people matter for journalists? Yeah, relationship building with in-house people matter for journalists.
I can speak for our team. It's really important, and it makes a big difference. You know, what I would say is good, strong PR people are so valuable to our journalists in helping them get sources, get answers quickly to questions, giving them access to news, potentially giving them unique stories. So yeah, if you can develop that dynamic, is very, very important to us.
I see. Melissa or Kelly, anything to add on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that if you've developed the relationship well, then yeah, it makes a huge difference. Like I've had a few PRs who I've kept relationships with for years, because not only have they helped me not only have they successfully pitched, but when I've had stories where I'm looking for an interviewee, they have helped me find someone, even if it is not their client. And so I will give them my time, and I will maintain that relationship with them, because I think that they're very valuable and they're so helpful. Yeah.
I see. And for Kelly.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think we should see relationship building as like a longer term thing rather than like for specific stories. So I think that's why our team, our banking team often, also meets in-house PR professionals for like lunch and, things that not necessarily will result in a story the next day, but it's, I guess, all part of a relationship building and just getting to know them, right? Like as people.
Yeah, and I think as like what Melissa said, you know, you never know when they might come in handy,
Mhm.
pitching a content or pitching a contact for a story that you're working on. All right, okay, and on to our next question over here. You know that given that most journalists are still working remotely, you know, how has it changed? Has it changed the way that you guys prefer to receive pitches? And given that there has been a lack of physical events and meetups, has it changed the way that that you would want to receive information and pitches from journalists?
Not really.
Okay, and so what's the main way? What's the main way that you guys have received pitches so far?
Email.
Emails.
Okay, so it's still the same despite the remote working environment. All right. Okay, we have a few questions here regarding verified sources and background checks. So to our panel, yeah, when it comes to picking up sources for for your interviews, for your stories, maybe you could share with us how would you go about doing verifying these sources and doing background checks of your newsmakers?
I think I'll go first because I think I've got the most simple answer because of the kind of news we do. Most of the people that we are going to interview are either in technology companies or that we're interviewing because of their professional profile. So we can check them on LinkedIn very quickly and probably 99% of the time verify that they are the person that we speak to. We're not covering things that require more in-depth verification than that. So in our case, it's quite simple.
All right, I see. Melissa, yeah, you are in touch with, you know, a huge range of newsmakers from day-to-day basis, from musicians to CEOs, C-suites. What's your take on verifying your sources? How do you do your background checks?
It depends on who it is. So obviously LinkedIn is a good way to do it. You also can Google and see if, you know, if this is a high profile person or supposedly a high profile person, you can Google them, see if they're in any articles, see if they're quoted, things like that. Another way I do it is just through my own network. So if I do a tech story or some startup story, and this actually happened, there was a company that someone mentioned to me, and I was considering, you know, I did the story, but I was considering interviewing this person. And then I looked at the company and I saw who had worked there, and I knew I knew these people, uh, and so I contacted them. This person wasn't there any longer, and I knew that this person was a credible person. So I just, you know, spoke to that person and asked for some information, and I also checked with some other people in that industry, and then based on that, I didn't move forward. So yeah, so it's a number of ways. It's from your personal network. It's also just from online research, and yeah.
All right, and Kelly, for yourself?
Yeah, I think on LinkedIn and also asking within my personal network. And I think within our newsroom, we also subscribe to some databases. So because we report a lot on organizations, so if it's one that is like, I guess, up and coming, a little bit less heard of, we try to look them up as well on our subscription databases. And I guess I'll just say that verification has become like a lot more important now that, you know, a lot of our work is just done in this like mediated space, and with, you know, news rife about like misinformation and fake news. I think we're paying a lot more attention to that.
All right, okay, Ken. Our next question touches more on multimedia, so it could be something directed to Kelly. So touching on multimedia and infographic content, what are your thoughts on receiving video content, video announcements? Do you prefer that over, say, a written press release? So
I think the bulk of my work is still in print, like written. So I think that's usually, I guess I don't discriminate. It's just that I haven't received that many examples of video press releases or video announcements. But I would say that our video team does make use of stock footage that companies that we acquire from companies. Like, for instance, we are working on an electric vehicle series, and we have for some of the footage we didn't manage to film, especially under such circumstances. So we have depended on companies supplying some of their in-house footage.
All right. Okay, Ken, thanks so much for sharing. And our last question, we'll direct this to each of you. It is, and I think you guys may have something good to contribute here. What is your biggest pet peeve with working with PR professionals? Just choose one. The biggest pet peeve when it comes to working with PR professionals. Yes. Yeah, maybe Andrew, we could start with you first.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So I know exactly what it is. Having got chased a lot to, are you going to cover story? Are you going to cover story? We get the complete opposite in almost, I'll say almost all cases, when we come back to a PR to say, we're covering the story, we would now like more detail, because we want unique, we want comment, we want something to make the story different from anyone else that's covering it. And typically when we go back and say, right, we've got some questions, we'd like to speak to someone, we get tumbleweed. There's a few that's not the case, but in so many cases it is, and that drives us mad.
I see. And for Melissa, for yourself, yeah, biggest pet peeve.
Actually, yeah, that's so true. Something similar, I think. When they finally do give us this person, so yes, I will do the story. I want to speak to the interviewee before we do the interview, because I want to make sure, before I even agree to do the interview, because I want to make sure that this person has the information I'm really looking for that will make this story interesting. And then you have to overcome all these obstacles to have a conversation with this person. It's not even the actual interview, it's just a pre-interview. It's just a phone call or a meeting, just to find out if what they have to say is relevant. And frankly, it does that person a lot of good in preparing them. And it also saves time in the actual interview. So you don't spend an hour interviewing them, and you can then just cut it down to 10, 15 minutes, because you're only going to use a certain number of sound bites, right? And you just want to highlight the issues that are actually going to be used, and you don't want to rehash things that have been said all over the place by 50 other people. So yes, access, please make it simpler.
Okay, great. And lastly, Kelly, your take on that, please.
I think this has overlaps with what the both of them said, but like being sidestepped when you ask questions, or like, sort of like the responses go a big round, but not really like answering your question. I think that happens a lot, but to a certain extent, I feel like that's also kind of like the job of the PR professionals to protect their brand and the organization they're representing. So yeah, I don't know exactly if it's a pet peeve. It does make, sometimes the quality of our news report less than desired, but I suppose it's also the onus of me as a journalist to try to find other sources to provide that perspective. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing what PR professionals can look out for to work better with you. All right. So that's the time we all have for questions. And thank you so much for sending all your questions, and we'll collect the remaining ones and answer and address them in our article on the PR Newswire blog. So do look out for it. So we've come to the end of today's webinar. A big thank you to Andrew, Melissa, and Kelly for sharing your valuable insights and perspectives on today's media landscape and how PR professionals can better partner with journalists. Before we go, we would like to share with you our latest communications resources. On the left, we have a communications calendar by our communications strategy team. The July calendar is filled with comms ideas of planning campaigns and press releases around the upcoming major events such as the upcoming Olympic Games. And do also look out for our APAC Media Landscape blog that's put together by our audience development team, where you can get top trends and insights in the media industry of 7 markets across APAC. You can scan the QR codes here to get hold of this content, or visit the resource section at our website, prnasia.com. Last but not least, please fill up the survey form when you exit so that we can deliver a better experience for you. And finally, Do follow us on social and feel free to reach out to us on these platforms if you have any queries. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you had a fruitful session with our panelists and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a
Thanks for
lot.
joining us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.